Huawei represents a means of control over every aspect of life that is very, very difficult for us to comprehend right now. 5G is a technology not for helping people communicate with each other quicker, okay? Because everyone knows it's a faster way, right, to pass data along. No, this is a technology that allows machines to communicate with each other. Imagine a driverless car. It has to communicate with the road. It has to communicate with a central server. It has to communicate with your phone and the other devices it has. It has to communicate with the other cars so it doesn't crash into them, right? All this stuff is happening at lightning speed. This is the world, we're a technologically enabled world. And in the Chinese Communist Party vision of this world, Huawei and the Chinese Communist Party have total control over these networks for every single person in the world.
We in our organization are concerned about the impact of China and what China's doing. And so we are really, I want to first say thank you to our next speakers for being here, because the Epoch Times is an extraordinary publication. They have an extraordinary website. Thank you for being here. We also had a wonderful movie last night. Thank you, sir, for being here. I've got questions for you. And Jan, I do it all the time. Jan Jekielek, pretty close. Jan Jekielek, who's a senior editor with the Epoch Times, was here last year and has been a great friend of our organization and our people, trying to help us see what's going on in the world and see what's going on in reporting, not limited at all to China. He began his career, he's been in academia, he's been in international human rights work overseas, and he's also been in media. He's been with the Epoch Times since 2009, and in a bunch of different roles, and is now, as I mentioned, senior editor there. He also, importantly, currently hosts a show on Epoch Times digital TV called American Thought Leaders. And that's been getting more and more popular. He gets incredible guests. It's impressive. And Josh Philipp is an award-winning investigative journalist and reporter and editor at the Epoch Times. He's extraordinary. If you read his stuff, he's on the front lines of figuring out what's happening, digging through it and explaining it. He is a recognized expert on unrestricted warfare, asymmetrical hybrid warfare, subversion, historical perspectives on today's issues. 10+ years of research and investigations into the Chinese Communist Party. This is Josh right here. This is the guy on the right, the young guy. The old guy is Jan. And he's and related topics. These gentlemen are really important to us because they're lighting the way and they're giving us a sense of what is happening, and they're educating us and teaching us, because we can't all figure it out. We need to have this help. And I just would say earlier, what's the challenge going forward? Where are we heading going forward? And one of the things I would say is that we have to understand what China is doing. And the title of this program is China's Hidden War. Please help me welcome Jan and Josh to the program, guys.
Thank you, Ed. It was wonderful to discover the Eagle Forum last year. I just didn't even know that organizations like this existed in America until I came here pretty much exactly a year ago. So before we talk about China's hidden war, I wanted to tell you just super briefly why we can talk about it, or why we know a lot about it at the Epoch Times. Most of you know our motto is truth and tradition. I see a number of subscribers. A few people came up to me and said, I love the subscription, thank you, and so forth. A lot of you know us because of our reporting on Spygate, or the panel that Joe Hoft and John had last year, and so forth. That's been, and I've even heard that at the Spygate poster that we have out there is going to be used in some of the talks today by others. But we actually originated about 20 years ago, and we were founded by Chinese Americans. Okay, we were founded super briefly, and there's more information on all this in this magazine that you have in front of you, most likely, unless someone snatched it. We were founded basically to combat Chinese Communist Party disinformation, and propaganda. These days we call that fake news. Back then that word didn't exist yet. And because we did that, because we were dedicated to exposing what this Chinese regime was doing and all the fake information it was basically pushing into America, we got attacked horribly. I mean, they've basically been trying to destroy us ever since, okay? So that's our acumen. We have our initial reporters in China, we had several, everyone got arrested, they got prison terms of 3 to 10 years. Chief editor got a 10-year prison sentence. And after that, everything in all our operations in China went underground. And we've cultivated an incredibly deep and hidden network of people who are committed to a free China that give us information. And this is one of the reasons why, for example, Josh in 2008, basically started reporting in Flushing, in the biggest Chinatown in New York City, about this weird phenomenon where these hordes of Chinese were coming out and basically attacking other Chinese that didn't share the Chinese Communist Party line. What was going on? And in the process, Josh, working with some of these deep insiders that we have, uncovered what people today know to be the United Front. Okay, some of you may have heard about this or not. The United Front, broadly speaking, is a multi-billion-dollar department and operation designed to influence people outside of China, initially Chinese communities, but then, of course, expanding onwards into society in general, to the Chinese Communist Party way of thinking, okay? And so this is one key part of China's hidden war, is these information influence operations. You've heard about Confucius Institutes, attempt to influence academia to the Chinese Communist Party way of thinking. There's actually approximately 30 odd different strategies that, and Josh can speak to this a little more in a moment, but which we consider asymmetrical warfare operations. So this is actually part of military activity designed to weaken the opponent. And the opponent, of course, is the free world, with America front and center. So, how many people here saw the film last night, Claws of the Red Dragon? Okay, incredible, right? Incredible. A few people had a question whether this is there a part 2? Something like this, right? This film was designed as a television pilot. The producers are over here, they confirmed that with me this morning. So there's more coming. So some of you already have an idea, okay, of a few different aspects of how these operations work. I interviewed Steve Bannon for American Thought Leaders a few weeks back, okay? And he made the assertion, which shocked even me. He said, I think Huawei, right, which is pictured in the film, is the biggest national security threat that America has ever faced, okay? And that it's faced a few, right? And I had to think about that. Bigger than nuclear war, than nuclear weapons? Right? And I thought about it, and I realized that he was right. Okay? Now, Huawei represents the tip of the spear of this Chinese asymmetrical warfare operations. I'll briefly read you, okay? This is from the Huawei About Us. I just looked it up this morning. We are committed to bringing digital to every person, home, organization for a fully connected, intelligent world. We have nearly 188,000 employees. We operate in more than 170 countries and regions, and we serve more than 3 billion people around the world. Okay? This is the company that's developing what it wants to be, what the Chinese Communist Party wants to be, is the new 5G technological standard for the world. Okay? Now, what is 5G? I've interviewed a number of, probably the preeminent expert on 5G, General Robert Spalding, right, on the show. I recommend you watch those. There's a couple of interviews about related to this. Huawei represents a means of control over every aspect of life that is very, very difficult for us to comprehend right now. 5G is a technology not for helping people communicate with each other quicker, okay? Because everyone knows it's a faster way, right, to pass data along. No, this is a way that this is a technology that allows machines to communicate with each other. Imagine a driverless car. It has to communicate with the road. It has to communicate with a central server. It has to communicate with your phone and the other devices it has. It has to communicate with the other cars so it doesn't crash into them, right? All this stuff is happening at lightning speed. This is the world, we're a technologically enabled world. And in the Chinese Communist Party vision of this world, Huawei and the Chinese Communist Party have total control over these networks for every single person in the world. Think about that for a sec. So I'm not going to talk more here. We're gonna do a robust question and answer session in a bit. But Josh here, as Ed mentioned, is actually an expert. He's developed a very deep expertise, I think some of the best I've ever seen, around understanding the strategies and the ways of thinking and the approaches behind how all this was developed. And again, Huawei, as crazy as this will sound, is just a piece of the puzzle. It's just a piece of the puzzle. Josh.
So what Huawei represents is, as Jan mentioned, the tip of the spear of the Chinese Communist Party's agenda for the world, not just the West. And what is that? It is the export of the China model. And the China model is the alternate form of government that they are using to challenge the American model. What is the American model of government? It is the international order, right? The Pax Americana, peace under America. It's the idea that that people are endowed with inalienable rights, certain basic rights which government should uphold and defend. It is the idea that if you violate these rights to a significant degree, you will be sanctioned, you will be punished. And China has created a very different world order where countries that are sanctioned, such as Iran, such as North Korea, continue to trade and continue to operate and continue to abuse their people despite these sanctions. And China allows this and props up this system. China has a system of government. It is a communist, totalitarian system, still very much so, of state-run companies under the guise of capitalism. It is not in any way a changing country. It has a very polished facade, but the human rights abuses, the totalitarian Orwellian state goes beyond anything I think anyone could have ever imagined. They have things such as the social credit system that monitors every single individual, tracks every single connection they have, every single purchase they make, every single friend they have, and it gives them a citizen score. And that citizen score determines your freedom or your oppression in that society. This is a system they are exporting. And when China goes to countries around the world through the One Belt, One Road initiative, Huawei is one of the key companies that builds these infrastructures. So when they go to countries, say, in Africa, they go to countries in Latin America, they go to Europe, they are constructing infrastructure, technological infrastructure, and they are putting in these capabilities within that infrastructure. A country can then have the option of adopting the China model of government. And so, just as an example, several African countries, several Latin American countries are already adopting very similar high-tech totalitarian systems. In fact, Darwin, Australia, is implementing part of this as we speak. And this is the alternate, I'd say, future of the world. And this is very much where things could go. Now, if anyone saw the movie last night, a few key terms came up. One was China 2025. One was the 1,000 Talents program. A few other things. They talked, of course, about 5G and the ability to, say, influence different, I think, drones and things like this. What China is doing, they have a saying, surpass you at the turn. In other words, it's very hard. If you want to, so just stepping back a bit, they have a program called Project 863. Project 863 was a program to catch up fast and surpass the West. It is considered one of the guiding, say, state-run policies for economic warfare and theft of intellectual property. Now, to step back a little bit further, everyone probably saw these 5 Chinese hackers who were indicted under the Obama administration. Those Chinese hackers were not just normal Chinese hackers. They've now moved this branch, they restructured it. It's now under the Strategic Support Force. But at the time, those 5 hackers were under Unit 61398, under the General Staff Department, 3rd Department. The General Staff Department is the war-fighting branch of the Chinese Communist Party. Why was the war-fighting branch of the Chinese Communist Party engaged in stealing intellectual property from American companies? Why was the war-fighting branch engaged in that? Keep in mind, Unit 61398 was one of 22 known operational bureaus. This was a very large operation. And the 3rd Department was the Signals Intelligence Department. Next to it was the 2nd Department, the Human Intelligence Department. And the 4th Department, the Electronics Intelligence Department. These departments work together. They also work in conjunction with many other departments within the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, this has been moved now into the Strategic Support Force. They restructured it to, I think, avoid criticism, right? Now, what did they do after Obama indicted them? Obama met with these, Chinese leaders. They agreed we will no longer steal intellectual property through, these means. What did they do? They used China Telecom and they diverted internet traffic to Chinese networks. In other words, American internet traffic was flowing through Chinese servers where they could steal it anyways. When you talk about companies like Huawei, ZTE, these ones, they say that no, we do not monitor data, we do not steal data. But under Chinese law, all data needs to be controllable and visible by the Chinese Communist Party. There is no such thing as data collected by Chinese companies that is not visible by the Chinese Communist Party. And so when we get into the bigger picture of what Huawei represents, it is a military tool of the Chinese Communist Party to expand its dominance around the world. And it's one that represents the export of the China model, an alternate system meant to challenge the American-led, international order, I guess we could call it. And it's one that represents totalitarianism, one that says you can do whatever you want to your citizens and we will not question you, we will allow it, we do not care. And on that note, too, one of the biggest questions with Huawei is when that woman is indicted to the United States, when the, say, charges are unsealed, who else is going to be exposed? Because when Chinese companies go abroad, this is how they operate. They'll get $10 million to make their deals, and $1 million of that is going to be for bribes. When you go into countries like Latin America, for example, and there's one stakeholder, one person who makes the call, and you say, I will give you $1 million to pass this deal, why should they care? And when you're dealing with big companies, that say that the person who makes the call, they don't really care about, they're going to retire in 5, 10 years anyways before anything comes and affects them. Get a big bribe, why not? And so China has created this system, and a lot of people could be exposed through this, Huawei indictment. We'll have to see what happens. But I think we should get more into the bigger picture. Now, Huawei is one part of many pieces of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. Jan mentioned there are about 30-ish unconventional warfare tactics used by the Chinese Communist Party. And it's important to understand how this works. When the Chinese Communist Party we hear about things like cyber attacks. We hear about things like culture war with its takeover of Hollywood. We hear about things like fentanyl, things like, this drug crisis. These are part of the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare system. It is something they talk about publicly, and it's something that our media does not talk about or tell us about typically. And what is it? Now, think about what is the goal of warfare. What would a country want to achieve in war? They have done that, and they said, how can we achieve those exact same goals without having to engage the United States in troop-on-troop combat? How do you obtain those exact same goals without having to engage in open warfare? And being a communist country that controls every single facet of Chinese society, they weaponized every single facet of Chinese society. And they are using that to wage war on the West. Now, to go over some of these tactics, there is non-military, trans-military, and unconventional military. Non-military could be things like culture warfare. How do you destroy the moral fabric of your enemy's societies? What is drug warfare, right? It is meant to corrupt the youth of a country, to gain control over the criminal networks of a country. Keep in mind that China is the largest supplier of precursor chemicals to the Mexican drug cartels. Keep in mind that they are the main source of all these synthetic drugs making their way into the United States. A great book on this is Red Cocaine by Joseph Douglas. He talks about the whole history of drug warfare and how it started under the Soviet Union, under Cuba, and under the Chinese Communist Party. Mao Zedong talked about revolutionary opium, how to weaponize drugs and how to use these. That was Red Cocaine, I saw some people writing, by Joseph Douglas. If you get into cyber warfare, you get into economic warfare, it's how do you control the GDP of a country? You get into business warfare. How do you control the say, death by 1,000 cuts approach? How do you steal from them what they produce? And what is one of the main goals of communism? Seize the means of production. And what are the means of production? That's the factories. That's the natural resources. And what is China doing when it goes abroad? It is going to countries like Australia. It is going to countries in Latin America, and it is buying up the GDP, products of those countries. They control the iron mines and things like this. They control the timber, whatever, in anything they can find that will give them control over that country, they buy control of. And so this is a very small picture of what's taking place right now. And I think when you get into the unconventional war for, say, open warfare, that's when you get into the future of where things could be heading. And Jan mentioned that Bannon's commented that Huawei is more of a threat than even nuclear weapons. And why is that? You're dealing with a country we're dealing with a future, I should say, where weapons are being developed on a terrifying extent. You're talking about things like AI, you're talking about things like biometrics, you're talking about things like okay, we got to take questions soon. Right? Yeah, long story short, where we are at there is a battle in the world, I would say. I think in the West we see it in this struggle between freedom and socialism. This idea that we could lose our freedoms, that the nature of the life we know could change. We've seen the effects of this, and we know that this is under attack yet again. When it comes to the international order, it is a struggle between the China model and the American model. And Huawei, of course, represents a key facet in that. So we can do questions now.
Okay, if you can.
I've seen our president tweet and tout 5G. And from what I've read about 5G, I'm kind of scared. And so I would like to know, does he know what you all know? And have you been able to communicate with the administration successfully?
So I am personally very much opposed to 5G, but I would also say that 5G, in terms of technological development, seems inevitable. The question is who controls the infrastructure as it's being built. And if the United States does not get engaged in building it abroad, China is going to do it. And of course, I should note too, the American 5G technologies are a whole lot more advanced than China's. China requires a whole lot more infrastructure. It requires higher frequencies. It's less safe. America does it better. Again, the question is who controls it. But yeah, it is concerning overall. I agree.
And as you heard from those stats that I read earlier, the Chinese Communist Party has a huge head start on getting other countries to basically adopt their infrastructure, and there's the danger, right? I don't know if it's 170 countries, but it's quite a number. I think it's like at least 60 countries now that have said, yeah, Huawei 5G, good to go.
I have a quick question. What is wrong with our ignoramus Congress that they wouldn't be protecting us from this? Is there not an assumption that people we elect Job number one is to protect us. Where are they on this?
If you were to ask me, I'd say there's two factors. One is, I'd say the biggest, giving them some goodwill, is that China has launched a very strong, I'd say, influence campaign. One of the things Jan mentioned was one of the things I've done a lot of research on and uncovered was the United Front Department. The United Front Department is the Chinese Communist Party systems for infiltrating and, say, gaining control of foreign communities. They work through Chinese fraternal organizations that are like the unofficial governing bodies of Chinatowns. Under those are the triads, the Chinese mafia. And they work also, so they work on the legitimate and the illegitimate sides of a society. And one of, of course, there's things like the Confucius Institutes, there's things like the Committee of 100 working on influencing high levels of US government. They pay for, they pay for mostly trips of pretty much every single US government official they can bring to China. Say a 5-star hotel trip for 2 weeks and they charge them $2,000 because they have to charge them something. And yeah, they're selling a very picture of China to them. The other side is, I would say, there is some corruption. I don't want to accuse anyone, but this is also a very real issue. But at the same time, I'd say a lot of them are pretty clear on it.
I'm a skeptic of what you're proposing. Isn't China in big trouble? Big debt, 3 times GDP, unrest in Hong Kong, diplomatically isolated with almost no allies whatsoever that would come to their aid.
Yes, and fully agreed. And if Trump can act quickly, I believe that China can be stopped. But at the same time, when it comes, so the Chinese Communist Party's economy is, a lot of people describe it as a Ponzi scheme. They can print money, they just want to keep people working, but they are facing severe internal instability. People no longer fear the Chinese Communist Party, and they are looking to the United States to support them. The Chinese Communist Party internally is facing daily mass protests, and they crush these brutally sometimes. Hong Kong is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this, but is the most visible. If Trump can really stand up to China, I believe it can be stopped. And it's true, it's not nearly as powerful as it likes to say it is, but it is making a huge push into other countries right now. Latin America, Africa, but also Europe, Western Europe.
Steve yesterday referenced we win, they lose. Some of you were at, probably everyone was at that speech. In this case, if America, if the US plays it right, it could be we win, they win, as in the Chinese people win, right? And the Chinese Communist Party loses.
All right, guys, let's thank these two gentlemen, Jan and Josh. Thank you very much.